It's time now for Between the Lines with Charlie Mitchell, Sun City's premier sports commentator. Join us for another in-depth report on the people and events that shape our community and the people in it. Ladies and gentlemen, with today's guest, here's Sun City's own Charlie Mitchell.
Welcome, Sun City viewers, to another edition of Between the Lines. I'm your host, Charlie Mitchell, and we come to you daily at 11 a.m. in the morning and 5:30 in the evening. And we can be seen on Time Warner Channel 5 and Hargrave 238, and outside the gates or on your computer at www.schhtv.com. We have a real special guest today. His name is Richard Donohue. He's no stranger to Between the Lines. Between the Lines had him on last spring, and he's an expert in football. He worked for the New York Giants after starting out in Ohio with a coaching career, and then later became a chief scout for the New York Giants and other major titles. As I said last week on the Ken Cribb Show, he was an outstanding speaker at the Low Country Athletic Club back in January. He gave us some insight in Bill Parcells, George Young, and Lawrence Taylor. So if he doesn't think I remembered his speech, I did. I learned a bit from it, more than a bit, about the Giants, who I've rooted for since I was about 7 years old. Now, with Richard, we're going to talk about his history of how he got into coaching and then moving on to the Giants. But before that, I want to celebrate a couple of things. And the first thing is that the famous Joe Garagiola, if you remember Joe Garagiola, he grew up with Yogi Berra in St. Louis. And Joe was of Italian descent, such as Yogi Berra was. And Joe was not a very great catcher, but he was a good catcher. And he played for various teams in the National League. I remember him with the New York Giants. But he is retiring. He's 87 years old. After 58 years, he's ending his broadcast career where he's been doing it with the Arizona Diamondbacks for a long, long time. And he has a sense of humor that's terrific. And he was quite a character on TV, and he'll always be remembered as a close friend of Yogi Berra. So Joe Garagiola is now retiring out in Arizona. So let's welcome Rich Donohue to the show. Rich lives here at Sun City over in the Riverbend section. And we're going to ask Rich to talk a little bit about, first, where he's from, because we have a lot of people that come from that same area in our country. So Rich, welcome to the show.
Good to be with you, Charlie.
Famous fist bump.
I started out and was born and raised in the Bronx in New York City. I went to high school there, and after that I went out to the Midwest at the University of Dayton in Dayton, Ohio. Spent 4 years there, and when I got out I started my career in teaching and coaching at a place called Bell Fountain, Ohio, and stayed there for I think it was 6 years, and from there I was a graduate assistant coach up at Michigan State University with Duffy Daugherty. And from Michigan State I went back to Columbia University in New York in the Ivy League. From there I went to United States Merchant Marine Academy on Kings Point, Long Island, several years there, and over to another smaller school on Long Island called C.W. Post College. And from there to the Giants. And from the Giants, 22 years there in a bunch of capacities, and eventually retired and came down here, Charles.
Okay, but you got to tell them about Joe Paterno's brother, who's now passed away.
When I met Joe Paterno's brother, George, I met George Paterno when I was at Michigan State. He was the backfield coach, the running back coach, as it was for Duffy Daugherty. And George is a New Yorker, I was in New York. We both hit it off very well. I left first and went to Columbia University. George left a year later, went back to New York and became the head coach at Merchant Marine Academy. George hired me, and I think that I worked for George for I was going to say 6 to 7 years at the Merchant Marine Academy. And George is a great guy, terrific football guy in his own way, very smart guy. Eventually, he left the Merchant Marine Academy, and he became you, Charlie, for Penn State. He did the radio and TV work locally in Pennsylvania for his brother. He's a great guy. He passed away about 10 years ago, but through him, I got to know his brother and that whole family, and it was just a great situation for me. Really top people, first class. I really enjoy my association with the Paterno family.
Now, your association out of CW Post, I'm going to ask you another question. You know who's become somewhat of a power athletic school is Stony Brook. Have you followed that?
I have, in a very distant way, I followed. I knew they have come up and they've advanced and they put a lot of money into their program, both basketball and football.
And baseball.
Yes, that's correct. It's a state university, and I know they get funding that way, and so that's why they're doing what they're able to do.
Okay. And what has happened to Hofstra?
I don't know. I've been down here for so long. I'm not up to date on what's going on with some of these smaller schools. One of the things about Stony Brook and Hofstra that's difficult is where they're located. It's hard for them to get somewhere else to play, and it's hard for somewhere else to get on in Long Island to play them, because you got to go through New York, and that's really a jam of thing. So I don't think that there's a desire on the part of Hofstra University to get any bigger than what they are. They just play the local small schools around the metropolitan area. I don't think it's anything wrong, but at one time they were a heck of a football team. They sure were.
Okay, now comes the early 80s or late 70s, and you see an opening and the Giants decide to hire.
The Giants had an opening, and they, through other people, contacted me, and I went in there and interviewed for a job as a scout. And they hired me almost immediately, and so I began my career really in 1980 as a talent scout for the Giants. A talent scout's job is really to travel around the country and to find players, visit every school that plays football, whether it's an Ohio State or whether it's a Miami of Ohio or even a school smaller than that.
Like Mount Union.
Like Mount Union, like Springfield College, like Urbana College, like so many others. And just find players. And my job was to just evaluate the talent and indicate where I thought they would be in the draft order, how high and how low and so on. And so I did that for like 10 years, and I was promoted to assistant personnel director and ran the draft, and eventually was personnel director, and eventually became assistant general manager.
Well, it's terrific. But now you go back to the 80s. Now Ray Perkins was...
Ray Perkins was I had 5 head coaches I worked for, and Ray Perkins was the first one.
Now he went back to Alabama years ago.
He left when Bear Bryant passed. Ray resigned from where we were to Giants and went down and assumed the job at Alabama.
Okay. So then after Ray Perkins, you had somebody else before Parcells, correct?
No.
No. Okay.
No. Ray Perkins, when Ray Perkins was the head coach in his second year, 82, he hired Parcells as defensive coordinator.
Okay.
So Bill was on board.
Okay.
George Young was the general manager. Ray left. George promoted Bill up to head coach. So Bill's first year was 83 as head coach.
Okay. When they promoted Bill Parcells, he was an unknown quantity at the time, right?
Relatively unknown, yes.
I mean, he coached at Ohio's Army, I guess.
No, he was a head coach at Air Force Academy for 1 year. And then, but he had coached around. He started, as you say, at Army, and he was down at Texas Tech. He was down in the South a little bit. And then he got out of, for some personal reasons, he got out of football for a year, and he wound up with the New England Patriots.
Oh, okay.
As a defensive coach up there, and then Ray, I think he was up there 1 or 2 years, and then Ray hired him to the Giant job as defensive coordinator.
Okay, so now we're building up to the great 86 year.
Yes.
And then 87, the Giants win the Super Bowl.
Win the Super Bowl. Beat Denver, beat John Elway out in the Rose Bowl in Pasadena.
Phil Simms.
Phil Simms.
Okay, now, when Parcells was promoted, or whatever you want to call him, who was Wellington Mara at the time the final decision maker, or was there?
Wellington was always the final decision maker.
Okay.
Only in the sense that he let you make the decisions, and if he had a problem with it, he'd come and talk to you about it.
Okay.
But if you could, and I don't mean to say he overruled you, if you could tell him, if you could convince him that this was what he should do, he'd listen to you and he'd go along with it. He, you know, Wellington was the kind of guy, he's going to give you all the rope you need to be a success or to hang yourself with.
Okay.
So if you said, well, I want to do this here, and he said, well, I got some reservations about this, and you could make a case and you could sell it to him, he'd say, okay, let's give it a shot. That's the way he was.
Now, was George Young then the general
Yes,
manager?
George hired Ray Perkins.
Okay, and then he decided to go with Parcells.
Yes.
Okay, okay. And Parcells comes to 1987, and all of a sudden the Giants are in the Super Bowl, and as you said, they demolished John Elway in Denver.
We were actually behind at halftime, but we
Okay.
we did
Right,
beat
but
him.
Sims had an unbelievable
Sims
game.
had it. I think he had 25 completions in a row or something. I think his record still stands.
That's 26 years ago.
Something like that, yeah.
Right, 26 years ago. Okay, then the Giants again. You're still with them.
Yep.
You've moved up in rank, we'll call it, or position
Yeah.
in the corporation or
Right.
in the company. And you come to what, 91 when they won again, or 92?
We won in 91,
91.
the season of 90, and we played in Tampa, and we beat Buffalo Bills, who had that great team with Kelly and all
Right.
those guys. Yeah, the field goal, the last play of the
Right.
game, the wide right, Scott Norwood misses it, we win the game.
Okay. What was the famous strategy that Parcells, I had I guess you know him, Fred,
Fred Hoagland.
right, the line coach, offensive line coach for the Giants. And he said that, I figured Parcells was almost like George Allen, that he closeted himself for 24 hours looking at film. Fred said, he used to say, I'm leaving at 5 o'clock. If you guys want to stay, that's your business.
Yeah, that was pretty much the way it was. I think Bill was very comfortable, confident, and secure in what he was doing. And Bill never believed in making things too complicated for the players. So why stay there and keep loading them up with this play, that play, or this defense, or this scheme, or that scheme? Bill didn't really favor that kind of an approach. His approach was keep it real simple. Everybody knows what they should do, so there's no misassignments, no misalignments, and just play hard.
Okay. And they were successful.
Yes.
Then, I'm just dwelling on Parcells, but he then later leaves and becomes the New England coach. Am I right?
Correct.
And where does Belichick? Belichick was with the Giants for a short time. Right?
Correct. Belichick was with us. Actually, Bill was in there a year before I was there. So Bill was with, and then Bill left us and went to Cleveland.
Okay.
The head coach of the Cleveland Browns.
That's right. You're right. Very good. Okay. So then Parcells eventually decides to leave the Giants, I guess, right?
Yes.
Okay, and they brought in a couple of coaches that Ray Hanley.
Ray Hanley was first.
And he had difficulty with
He had
it.
some difficulties. Next was Dan Reeves.
Dan Reeves
And then next was Jim Fossil.
and Jim Fossil,
Right.
who seems to be out of football these days.
Yes.
Okay. And the current Giant coach,
Tom Coughlin.
ex-BC.
Ex-BC,
Jackson.
ex-receiver coach for us on the 86 Super Bowl team.
Okay, there you go, tip. 86 team. Okay. Coughlin's got the Giants now. You keep abreast with certain people still in the Giant organization?
Yes.
Okay. Now, this year, let me ask you this first question about the Giants. They just signed Victor Cruz.
Victor Cruz.
$43 million, 6 years. I said it's a good deal.
It's a
for
great
Cruz
deal.
and
It's
the
a great
Giants,
deal. It's a great deal.
except for a possible injury.
That's with any player.
Right, okay. So he's locked in.
He's locked in for the next 6, 7 years, whatever it is. Yeah.
Okay.
6 years.
Are the Giants looking now beyond Eli Manning?
Sure, you're always looking. The Giants in the last draft, the one we just had, in the 4th round, took a quarterback.
Okay. Who was he?
The kid from Syracuse, Nisbeth, I think his name is,
Okay,
N-I-S-S-I-A-B or something like that. But they took a quarterback from University of Syracuse. You always have to have that because your quarterback, whether it's Eli Manning or Tom Brady or whoever it is, could get hurt.
Okay.
You got to have a backup. You got to have somebody who can get you through a game, get you through a couple of weeks, or maybe even get you through the season.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Understood. Okay. Now, this year, the Giants, Cruz, they got rid of, maybe not rid of, but he played with a broken foot for 2 years, and I loved him. He went to Indianapolis, the halfback.
Yeah.
Bradshaw?
Yeah, Brad. Yeah, I know who you mean. Yeah, Ahmad Bradshaw.
Right. And
Yeah.
I guess his the Giants decided not to sign him.
Right.
Well, you play with a broken foot. I can understand. But the Giants got a new running back last year. I can't think of his name.
They drafted the first-round kid from Virginia Tech.
Right.
His name is Wilson.
Right. He looked good.
Yeah, and I think they're really depending upon him. They're really going to give him an opportunity this year to show he's a player.
Okay. All right, NFL this year. You followed the draft. You probably give tips still back to the Giants? Meaningless, but you might give them, right?
I follow the draft.
Okay, you followed the draft. Okay, tell me what went on in the draft. I wasn't.
I think there's a lot of things you can read about the draft. Some of the commentators, of course, and you have to understand, Charlie. I know some of them, and I don't believe in most of them. They say it was a poor draft, and they're reflecting on the fact that it was not a year where you had a lot of dominating, skilled players like quarterbacks, receivers, running backs. What you had and the value that you had in this draft was with big men, big offensive linemen, big defensive linemen. So commentators who love to watch some receiver do some fancy things, quarterback making all these throws, their eyes are not tuned into those guys up front. So they don't think about them very much. But you can't have a team unless you've got those great offensive linemen. And sure, you can't play defense without those. So I think the big difference this year was a predominance of quality big men, offensive and defensive linemen, that went fairly high in the draft. The first two guys off the board were offensive tackles.
Okay. And who were they, if I may?
They, the kid from Texas A&M, Locklear, and the other kid from, he was the second one, the kid from Western Michigan was the first player.
Western Michigan.
Yeah.
Wow, that's
I
interesting.
can't remember his name, but or either Western or Central Michigan. Anyway, that's where he came from. He was the number one. The kid from Texas A&M was number two. And then Alabama, they had two offensive linemen in the first round taken two. One was a guard, their right guard and right tackle. So it was a year when in the first round where all those big guys went. Now, the players who get all the headlines and score all the touchdowns, they were more in rounds 2, 3, and 4. They were in that area of the draft. So one of the things, when people tell me, gee, it was an interesting draft, it was a mediocre draft, I would say that's because you don't understand the value and the importance of big men in the game, because that's where the value was, and that's where people went. As NFL teams went into the offensive and defensive line and took those players to look at those. So people do not seem to think it was an interesting draft, but it really was.
Well, because it wasn't about the guys.
Right,
strong.
exactly.
Okay. Now, tell me, refresh my memory of who the Giants drafted when they finally got the draft.
They drafted an offensive lineman also,
Okay.
and they needed one. The kid
That's right.
his name was Pugh. He's an offensive lineman from Syracuse, by the way.
Oh, okay.
They're left tackle at Syracuse. But they needed, the Giants have a lot of instability in their offensive line, have had it for the last several years. They're getting by on duct tape and good coaching, but they don't have great talent.
Right.
But they needed to take an offensive lineman, and they did, and I think he's going to be very good for them. He'll be a slow starter. He probably will never wind up in Canton Hall of Fame, but he'll be a solid player for them.
Okay. Now, by the way, the Syracuse coach of
Doug Marrone.
He's just went
Buffalo.
Buffalo. So he didn't have to go pay a lot of expenses to move down the road. Okay.
right.
Okay. And Buffalo is always on the cusp, but doesn't seem to get what they need.
And that's always, they are on the cusp, and they'll be on the cusp again this year. They got two really pretty good running backs. They drafted, surprised a lot of people. They took a quarterback. First quarterback taken in the draft was the kid from Florida State. Buffalo took him.
Okay.
Yeah, and that was a surprise because he's not a polished product. He's certainly not a finished guy. He's a big, strong guy. He's a little inconsistent. Hasn't played great, and people question him because he had a lot of great players around him. And why didn't Florida State win a little more games? But that's who they selected.
Okay.
People were surprised because they thought if Buffalo was going to take a quarterback, they'd take the quarterback that Doug Marrone, the coach, was familiar with, who he had at Syracuse, which the Giants wound up in the fourth round taking.
Okay. So when the season opens and the different divisions, when it's finally getting into the playoffs, what's happening, for example, more at home in the East?
Boy, in the East, it's difficult because you have New England will probably be a contender, although they have some problems. Most recently, everybody's read the paper. So they're there. Buffalo has a new coach. Philadelphia has a new coach,
That's right, from Chip Kelly.
Kip Kelly. Now, Baltimore will be tough. Baltimore is very good, and they'll be tough. The Jets are, I think, really in disarray. I think they're lost. I'm not sure. I think the coach has only 1 year on his contract to go, and I feel if he doesn't really win this year, they'll make a change there.
Right.
Rex
Ryan.
Rex Ryan. I think the Giants will be very competitive. Washington should be very competitive if that quarterback's knee is right.
Right.
So those are the Eastern teams. Pittsburgh will be strong.
Right.
If you how far out west you want to go, I think Cleveland is new and they got a new general manager and new coach and all that stuff. So I don't know what's going to happen there.
And the Bears are in transition.
The Bears are in transition, but if I can put a plug in for the guy that became the head coach there, his name is Mark Trestman. Mark Trestman was up in Canada, won the Grey Cup up there for 2 years. Mark's a very fine coach who did coach in the NFL for several different teams, plus coached down in college, played quarterback at the University of Minnesota. He's a very, very intelligent guy, very smart offensive mind. And he's done some pretty good moves in the offseason in terms of acquiring free agents. And I thought they had a decent draft. So I'm looking to say, gee, Chicago could surprise a lot of people.
Surprise the Packers.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I think so.
What about Andrew Luck at Indianapolis?
Oh, the sky's the limit for him. I think he's just had his first year. He certainly can't do it all by himself, and you have to surround him with good players, and I think they're trying to do that. But don't forget, he had him in the playoffs last year.
Exactly.
So, I think he's going to build on that. And I just think that, there's a very positive thing going on in Indianapolis with that kid. He's a great quarterback.
Okay, in conclusion, it seems to me that a lot of the NFL players, which the public's, the papers play up, get in trouble.
25 arrested since the Super Bowl.
Right. Okay. And the worst case is with Aaron Hernandez up in New England.
It is.
And that's possible murder charges. So do the owners try to do character checks, or the teams try to help their...
In the last, Charlie, I'm going to say even 6 or 7 years, that's all they worked on. We had a team psychologist. We had everything you could possibly want. We tested them. We did everything we could to weed out guys that had problems. It doesn't mean to say we're 100% successful, but I think we talk about cutting down your margin of error. And we did that. We didn't have a lot of those kind of guys, but we had some. And I think that everybody now today is working so hard at doing that. I think the kid Aaron Hernandez, the boy implicated in New England there, he was a 4th-round pick, first-round talent.
From Florida.
Yes, from Florida. He lasted to the 4th round because everybody had concerns about his character and his personality.
Right. Okay. Well, we could dwell on character a long time, but you're one of the best to come on our show, and we're going to get you back once the season begins, and we can get down to the nitty-gritty. We're naturally rooting for the Giants and Jets and all those teams. And thank you, Richard, for coming on the show.
Anytime, Charlie.
How about a fist bump? In conclusion, I want to say Richard Donohue knows his football. He spent most of his life in football, and he's a devoted fan. And on September 9th, the Low Country Athletic Club, he will be the main speaker again. So he's going to preempt Between the Lines. We've got him a couple weeks before, and you can get a taste of Richard Donohue and then go over to the Low Country Athletic Club and hear Richard on September 9th speak again about football, the NFL, and his career. And again, Sun City viewers, have a great summer, and we thank you for watching Between the Lines, and have a great week.